The knocking on the door at 11 o'clock at night was different from the normal knocks people make when visiting. It wasn't a polite knock from a neighbor asking to borrow a cup of sugar or a lost delivery person looking for the correct address. It was a heavy, deliberate sound from someone who didn't need to ask permission because they already considered themselves entitled to enter. It was a sound that made Amanda freeze on the sofa, where she was trying to study for her nursing exam, which was in 2 days. It was a sound that made her heart race with the instinctive fear that comes from knowing something very bad was about to happen, and there was no way to stop it. She didn't want to open the door. She wanted to pretend she wasn't home, that the small, dark apartment was empty. But the living room light was on and clearly visible through the front window, and whoever was on the other side knew someone was there, knew they were being avoided, and Amanda had a terrible feeling that ignoring the door would only worsen an already obviously awful situation. So she stood up on trembling legs, nervously smoothed her hair even though she knew appearances didn't matter at this moment, and walked to the door with steps that seemed to take an eternity, each one bringing her closer to a confrontation she didn't want, but couldn't avoid. Through the peephole she saw 3 men, all wearing dark suits that seemed too expensive for the neighborhood where she lived, all with postures that screamed danger even without visible weapons, and the man in the center, the one closest to the door, was different from the other 2 in ways that went beyond being in front. He was taller, perhaps 6 feet 3 inches, with broad shoulders and a presence that made him seem larger than the physical space he occupied, with black hair combed back, revealing a face with a strong bone structure, a defined jaw, eyes so dark they seemed black even under the yellowish light of the hallway, and a thin scar across his left eyebrow that suggested violence in the not-distant past. Amanda knew who he was, even though she had never seen a picture. She knew because Sophia had described him with terror in her voice when, finally, she had admitted 2 weeks ago the magnitude of the mess she had gotten herself into, how much money she owed, to whom she owed it, why she was too terrified to leave the house, why she had begged Amanda not to open the door to strangers, not to answer calls from unknown numbers, to pretend they didn't exist if someone came looking for them because the people Sophia owed money to weren't the type of people who accepted excuses or payment plans. They were the type of people who demanded payment in kind when money wasn't available. And Sophia had disappeared 3 days ago, had run away without saying anything, leaving only a note saying, "I'm sorry. I need to go. Don't look for me. You're better off without me." And now creditors were at the door and Sophia wasn't here to face the consequences of her own choices. Amanda opened the door because she had no choice. Letting them break it down would be worse. And when she opened it fully, she came face to face with the man who had haunted Sophia's nightmares, Luca Santoro, head of the largest criminal organization on the East Coast, a man about whom newspapers wrote in whispers and whom police avoided out of fear or bribery, a man with a reputation for being brutally efficient, absolutely ruthless, completely devoid of mercy when betrayed or robbed. And Amanda was looking directly into his eyes, trying not to show how terrified she was, trying to maintain an upright posture even though every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to do anything except stand still while the predator assessed his prey. "Sofia Torres," Luca said, his deep voice with a subtle Italian accent making each syllable grim. "Where is she?" Amanda forced herself to maintain eye contact, forced herself not to stutter even, though her throat was closing up with fear. "I don't know," she said. And it was technically true. Sophia could be anywhere, any city, any state. She hadn't left any clues. She left 3 days ago. She didn't tell me where. She hasn't called me since. Lucas studied her with an intensity that made Amanda feel as if he could read her every thought, every lie, every hidden secret, and she kept as neutral a face as she could, refusing to give more information than absolutely necessary. "And you?" "Ah," Luca asked, tilting his head slightly, a movement that would have been curious if it weren't so threatening. "Amanda Torres," she replied, "Sophia's sister. Half-sister, technically, different parents, but we grew up together." Luca nodded, as if the information confirmed something he already suspected, and then stepped into the apartment without asking permission, forcing Amanda to step back. 2 men followed behind him, closing the door, creating a barrier between her and any possibility of escape. Not that she would try to run, because running from men like that was an invitation to be hunted, and hunting always ended badly for the prey. "Sophia owes me $300,000, Luca said, pacing the small apartment as if conducting an inspection, looking at photos on the wall, books on the shelf, personal details that revealed who Amanda was, how she lived, what she valued. $300,000 that she borrowed to cover gambling debts she accumulated in my casino's debts. She promised to pay in 6 months, a deadline that expired 3 weeks ago. Since then, she has avoided my men, ignored calls, disappeared whenever we try to find her. And now, he turned to look directly at Amanda. Now I find out she's completely run away, leaving you here to face the consequences in her place. I have nothing to do with her debts, Amanda said, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't know about money until she told me 2 weeks ago. I don't have that kind of money to pay for her. I work as a nursing technician earning a salary that barely covers rent and food. I can't be held responsible for her choices. Luca smiled, but there was no warmth there, only calculated cruelty that made Amanda's stomach churn. Family is responsible for family, he said. That's how my world works. Sophia disappeared, so someone needs to pay her debt. And you? He stepped closer, so close that Amanda could feel his warmth, the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more masculine. Your family, so you pay. How? Amanda asked, hating how weak her voice came out, hating vulnerability but unable to hide it. How can I pay $300,000 when I don't even have $3,000 in my bank account? Luca studied her silently for a moment that seemed eternal, his eyes traveling over her face, down her body in a way that should have been uncomfortable but was more evaluative than sexual, as if he were calculating value, potential, usefulness, and when. He finally spoke again. His voice had a different quality, something Amanda couldn't identify, but that made her skin crawl in ways that weren't entirely related to fear. There are ways to pay besides money, Luca said. You're beautiful, clearly intelligent, considering the medical books everywhere, and apparently have a sense of loyalty since you're still here instead of running away like your sister. These are valuable qualities I can use. Amanda felt terror rise in her throat. Because she knew what he was suggesting. She knew that men like him had businesses where women were commodities, where bodies were currency, where dignity was sacrificed to pay debts, and she opened her mouth to say no, to scream that she'd rather die than prostitute herself, but Luca raised his hand, stopping her words before they came out. Not what you're thinking, he said, almost sounding offended. I'm not a pimp. I don't sell women. But I need someone. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I need someone trustworthy to work closely with me. A personal assistant, a secretary, someone who manages schedules, handles mail, keeps my life organized. The previous person was fired for stealing, and since then I've had difficulty finding someone who is both competent and loyal. You would be both because debt guarantees loyalty and education suggests competence. So the proposal is, work for me until the debt is paid off. I estimate that 5 years of service would cover the total amount plus interest. 5 years, Amanda repeated, processing the offer. Searching for the trap she knew had to exist because criminal deals always had hidden costs, always came with prices that weren't declared initially. 5 years of my life working for you, doing what exactly? What kind of tasks does a mafia boss's personal assistant perform? Luca smiled again, this time with something that could be genuine humor. Mostly mundane tasks, he said. Scheduling meetings, organizing, paperwork, making sure I don't forget important appointments. Occasionally you'll witness deals that are, he searched for the word, extra legal, but witnessing isn't participating. I won't ask you to do anything that excessively compromises moral integrity, just administrative work that keeps the empire running smoothly. And if I refuse? Amanda asked, needing to know the full extent of the situation. If I say I can't do it, that I won't pay Sophia's debt, what happens then? Luca became serious again, all trace of humor disappearing. Then, he said simply, I'll have to send a message through you. A message to Sophia wherever she's hiding. A message to anyone else who considers running away from debts with me. A message that demonstrates that the consequences are real and painful. And Amanda, he said her name for the first time, making it sound intimate and threatening simultaneously. You don't want to be that message. Trust me, it wasn't a real choice. Amanda knew that. It was an illusion of choice. A door that seemed to lead to two paths, but both led to the same destination, serving Luca Santoro in one way or another. The only difference being whether it would be voluntarily with some control over the situation or forcibly without dignity or autonomy. So she did the only thing she could do, the only decision that allowed her to retain some power, some agency over her own destiny. Okay, she said, her voice firm now, decisive. I accept. 5 years. But, Lukashi, forced herself to use his name, to treat him as an equal, even though he wasn't. I need guarantees. Guarantees that you won't hurt me, that you won't force me to do anything illegal that puts me at risk of imprisonment. You won't, she hesitated. You won't touch me without consent. If you agree to that, then we have a deal. Luca extended his hand, a formal gesture of a deal being closed. I agree, he said. You work. Maintain discretion about what you see and hear, and in return, I guarantee security, a salary that comfortably covers living expenses, and respect for personal boundaries. 5 years and the debt is paid off, you are free to leave without looking back. A fair deal considering the alternative. Amanda looked at the outstretched hand, at long fingers that had probably ordered deaths, that controlled an empire built on illegality, that now offered a deal that would imprison her for 5 years, but also offered survival, and she extended her own hand, touched his palm, squeezed firmly, closing a deal that would completely change her life in ways she couldn't yet foresee, but already feared and strangely anticipated. The handshake was brief, but Amanda felt electricity in the contact, felt something pass between them that went beyond a business transaction, something that made Luca pause as well, his eyes meeting hers with surprise that mirrored what she was feeling. A recognition of a chemical attraction that shouldn't exist between creditor and forced debtor, between criminal and victim of circumstances, but existed nonetheless. Undeniable and inconvenient and potentially devastating depending on how they chose to deal with it. Luca let go of her hand first, took a step back, creating professional distance, and said to one of the men, Marco, take Miss Torres to her apartment tomorrow at 8 in the morning. She starts work immediately. She needs to learn routines, meet people, understand how the operation works. And tonight? Amanda asked. Can I stay here? Finish studying for the exam? Try to maintain some normalcy before my whole life changes tomorrow. Luca considered, then nodded. Tonight you're free, he said. Enjoy it, because tomorrow belongs to me, and the next 5 years too. He turned to leave. 2 men following, but stopped at the door, looked back one last time. And Amanda, he said, your sister made a cowardly decision to run away. You made a courageous decision to stay. That means something to me. It means that maybe, just maybe, these 5 years won't be as bad as we both think they will be. And then he left, leaving Amanda alone in an apartment that suddenly seemed smaller, colder, emptier than before. And she collapsed onto the sofa, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made, of 5 years she had just sold to save her own life, of a future that had been snatched from her hands by Sophia's irresponsibility and the cruelty of a universe that placed sisters in impossible positions and expected them to make impossible choices and live with the consequences of choices they should never have to make. She cried, finally letting the fear, anger, and betrayal she felt surface. She cried for the life she had lost, for the freedom Sophia had stolen from her, for 5 years that would belong to a dangerous man who looked at her with eyes that held threat and something more, something Amanda didn't want to name but couldn't ignore. Morning arrived far too quickly, Amanda having barely slept, and at 8 o'clock sharp Marco was knocking on the door, this time a polite, almost apologetic touch, and she opened it to find a middle-aged man with a kind face that didn't match his profession. And he smiled sadly, seeing the dark circles under her eyes, seeing evidence of a sleepless night. I know you didn't choose this, he said as he drove his luxury car through the city toward a completely different neighborhood. A neighborhood where apartments cost more than Amanda would earn in her entire life. But a boss is a fair man in an unfair world. If you work well, if you remain loyal, he will treat you decently. You've seen worse things happen to people who deserved less. Luca's apartment was a penthouse atop a building that dominated the city skyline, an open space with masculine and sophisticated decor, modern art on the walls that was probably worth a fortune, a breathtaking panoramic view, and Luca waiting in an office that occupied an entire room, seated behind a glass and steel desk with a laptop and multiple phones and stacks of documents that needed to be organized, classified, managed, and he stood up when Amanda entered, a gesture of courtesy that surprised her because she didn't expect a criminal to have manners. Welcome, Luca said, indicating a chair in front of his desk. Let's start with the basics. This is your office too. He showed a space next to it with its own desk already set up with a computer and supplies. You manage my schedule, return calls that don't require personal attention, organize documents by priority, and occasionally accompany me to meetings to take notes. Hours are usually 9 to 6, occasionally later if the situation requires it. Pay is $5,000 a month, enough for you to maintain your apartment and a comfortable life. $5,000 to pay off a debt of $300,000. Amanda calculated mentally. At that rate, it would take more than 5 years, significantly more. Luca saw the confusion on her face and explained, "The debt will be forgiven after 5 years, regardless of the total payment. $5,000 is for you to live on, not for debt. Consider time as payment, not money. You give me 5 years of loyalty, I forgive the debt, and I let you go." The clearest transaction ever. And so they began. Amanda immersing herself in work that was surprisingly mundane, considering she was working for a criminal. It was mostly administrative, as Luca had promised, managing appointments and organizing paperwork and ensuring that his legitimate empire operations ran smoothly, and she discovered she was good at it. That a brain that memorized medical terminology also quickly absorbed the complex organizational systems and protocols that Luca needed, and he noticed commenting on her efficiency, on how she didn't need to repeat instructions, on how she anticipated needs before he had to ask. Weeks turned into months, Amanda adjusting to the strange life working for a man who terrorized others, but was surprisingly polite to her, who never raised his voice, who respected the boundaries she set, who gradually began to share more than just work. Started conversations about books they both read, about movies they enjoyed, about philosophies of life that were surprisingly similar considering how different their circumstances were. And Amanda found herself occasionally forgetting that Luca was a criminal, that he ordered violence, that he lived in a world that functioned through fear and coercion, because with her he was just a man, intelligent and funny in a dry way, and strangely lonely despite his power. And the attraction they had felt at their first handshake didn't go away. It only grew, tension building every time they worked close together, every time their fingers touched while passing documents, every time their eyes met and held for too many seconds, every time Luca said her name in a way that made Amanda's stomach churn, every time she caught him looking at her when she thought he wasn't being watched, an expression on his face of desire mixed with conflict, because he clearly felt attraction too and also knew that acting on her would be a complication neither of them needed. It was 6 months later that everything changed. After a particularly tense meeting where Amanda had witnessed Luca negotiating with his rival using a combination of intimidation and diplomacy that made it clear why he was so successful, they returned to the apartment late at night, both exhausted, and Luca served expensive whiskey that Amanda would normally refuse, but this time she accepted because she needed something to process the tension of the night. They sat on the sofa with the illuminated city below them, a comfortable silence between them, until Luca broke the silence, speaking what they had both been thinking but avoiding. "This is becoming impossible," he said, not looking at her, but at the glass in his hand. "Working with you every day, being near you, pretending I don't feel what I'm feeling. It's not fair to either of us." Amanda knew she should be professional, should keep her distance, should remember she was there out of debt, not choice, but 6 months of knowing Luca had changed her perception, had revealed layers beneath his reputation, had revealed a man she couldn't help but be attracted to, a man who truly saw her, who respected her, who made her feel things she shouldn't feel for an employer, and certainly not for a criminal. No, she said softly. "I feel it too. And I don't know what to do about it because the power dynamic is all wrong. Because I'm here because my sister screwed everything up. Because theoretically I'm her prisoner, even if she doesn't feel that way. Because of 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea." Luca finally looked at her, put his glass down, turned to face her completely. "But what if it's not a bad idea?" he said. "What if it's the only good thing that came out of this terrible situation? What if 5 years don't have to be just a transaction, but could be," he searched for the word, "could be something more?" Amanda should have said no. She should have protected her own heart. She should have remembered that falling for Luca Santoro was a recipe for disaster because he lived in a world where love was. Vulnerability and relationships were exploitable, and she was already in a vulnerable position without adding feelings to the mix. But when she looked into his eyes, when she saw vulnerability that mirrored her own, when she recognized that they were both lonely people who had found connection in the most unlikely place, she couldn't put up walls. She couldn't pretend she didn't want exactly what he was offering. Then she kissed him, or he kissed her. Then neither of them was sure who closed the distance first. All that mattered was that they were kissing, that it was inevitable and scary and perfect, that months of tension were released in a moment of mutual surrender. And when they separated, both breathing heavily. Luca pressed his forehead against hers and said, "This complicates everything. We changed the rules. It's not just work anymore." Amanda agreed. "I know, but maybe complicated is okay. Maybe complicated is worth it if it means having this, having you, having something real amidst all this chaos." And they began a secret relationship that gradually became less secret, transforming their work dynamic into a partnership, making 5 years seem less like a sentence and more like the time they would have together to build something neither of them had planned but both desperately wanted. Luca began distancing himself from the more violent parts of the empire, delegating to lieutenants, focusing on legitimizing operations because Amanda made him want to be better, to be worthy of her, to be a man who could offer her a future, not just a complicated present. And when Sophia reappeared a year later, guilty and repentant and wanting to explain, it was Luca who completely forgave the debt, who said that Amanda had paid enough through time and loyalty, but mainly through changing him in ways he couldn't quantify but knew were valuable beyond money. Sophia cried, thanking him and repeatedly apologizing to Amanda, who forgave her because family is complicated and people make mistakes, and sometimes mistakes lead to good things, even if the process is terrible. At the end of 5 years, when Amanda was technically free to leave, she chose to stay not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because the place next to Luca had become home. Because the love they found was more valuable than the freedom to live without complications. Because sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. Because he had chosen her when he came to pay Sophia's debt. Had looked at her and decided that she was worth more than revenge or a show of power. That she deserved a chance even though she wasn't guilty. And that choice had saved them both from the loneliness that consumed them. Had created a family of 2 broken people who repaired each other through forced closeness that transformed into chosen love. And on the night when 5 years officially ended, Luca didn't renew her employment contract, but made a different proposal. He knelt down, offered her a ring, and asked if she would stay not as an employee, but as his wife, as his partner, as a choice, not an obligation. Amanda said yes through tears. Because the journey of being taken in the place of a sister to become the love of the life of an impossible man had been tortuous, but had led her exactly where she belonged. It had proven that sometimes destiny works through disasters, that sometimes being second choice is actually being the real choice when first choice never deserved to be chosen. And that a debt of $300,000 had bought not just 5 years, but a lifetime of love with a man who had started as a captor and become a savior in ways neither of them planned, but both were grateful for every day.